Welcome to this rapid revision exam skills session looking at the Pearson Edexcel Paper 2 World Depth Study Question 3. Explain the importance of X to Y. This is where you'll have to explain the importance of a given thing to another given thing, maybe an event or maybe a development. You'll have to answer two questions like this. Each one is worth 8 marks, so there's 16 marks in total for question 3. You will get some choice as to which events you're going to have to write about though. Let's have a look at what Pearson Edexcel Paper 2 actually involves. Let's get a bit of background about the Pearson Edexcel Paper 2. Traditionally, this is split in two. One is a British depth study and the other is a European or wider world depth study. The topic that I teach is Anglo-Saxon and Norman England circa 1060 to circa 1087 and the American West 1830 to 1895 for the wider world depth study. In the past, these two have been provided with as separate booklets answered within the same exam. For the year 2022 only though, these exams have been split into two separate shorter exams, so just be mindful of that. Traditionally though, the total time for both papers is 1 hour and 45 minutes. You can half that in 2022 as they will be sat separately. Now let's have a look at the question. With this practice question, I'm going to be looking at some American West topics. That's because that's what I actually teach and that's what my students need. However, the skills and the techniques that we're going to go over here will be relevant to any topic that you might be doing for this exam. So stay tuned, it could still well be useful, especially when we're looking at things like the mark schemes and how you achieve them. Let's have a look at the instructions here. For this question, you'll need to choose two questions that you are most confident about. So please don't try and answer all three of them, just choose the two that you think you'll be best at. So let's have a read of the question. Explain two of the following, and that's crucial. Don't just choose one, don't choose to do all three, actually do two of them. You'll need to then identify relevant, specific knowledge. So it might be knowledge about the importance to changes in ranching for the cowboys' way of life, or the importance of the exoduster movement for the growth of settlement, or the importance of the extermination of the buffalo for the Indians' way of life. That's why at the start I referred to the importance of X, one thing, to another. You'll need to explain how your chosen examples are important in relation to the issue in the question, which here would be the cowboys' way of life. Here's what a part of the mark scheme looks like. Here you're going to be assessed on your analysis of second order concepts, in this case consequence or significance. That's another word for importance, and we call that assessment objective 2. Your knowledge and understanding of features and characteristics, in other words just what you know, is assessment objective 1. You get 8 marks for AO2 and 8 marks for AO1, but note that each part of the answer is marked separately. So effectively it's 4 marks for AO1 and 4 marks for AO2 for each of the two questions that you answer. You should spend about 24 minutes on this question, so about 12 minutes per part. It's a little bit confusing the wording of this. Although it counts as one question, there are two really distinct parts to it, so it's kind of a two-parter question really. And that's why it says down here, the total for question 3 is actually 16 marks, but 8 marks for each component. Let's have a look at what the examiner is actually looking for. I'm going to highlight some elements to the mark scheme here, just to show you the difference between a decent answer and a really good one. I've left out level 1 because we should be aiming higher than that. In level 2, it shows that you've made an attempt to analyse importance. So you can't really get level 2 unless you have referred to importance and at least tried to explain why your particular issues or examples are important in the focus of the question. Compare that though to level 3, where you are showing an analysis of importance which isn't just there, but it's coherent and logically structured. So there's some sort of flow, there's links between the different paragraphs you're going to write about and the different examples that you use, and you really do specifically refer to what makes it important. Compare that to level 2 though rather, where some passages may lack coherence or organisation. Perhaps your examples are very isolated and unrelated and unlinked. When it comes to the knowledge though, in level 2 it shows accurate and relevant information is needed, which means that you've actually got your stuff right, showing that you've got some knowledge and understanding of the period, as opposed to level 3 which shows that you've got a good knowledge of the period and of the required features and characteristics of the period that you're studying. So you've got accurate knowledge that's good and broad, that's relevant to the examples actually given in the question. So now we've got an idea of what the examiner is actually looking for. Let's have a look at some example answers and how you might approach them. First things first, you'll notice at the top of the answer page, it's got the 3 questions. Make sure that you put a clear mark on the one that you're going to attempt. My practice answer is going to be on the importance of changes in ranching for the cowboy's way of life. Although the techniques that I'm going to demonstrate here would be useful on any of the other questions too, just with different knowledge. And that's also true for the other topics in this exam paper. I often encourage my students to use a structure like point, example, explain and link in their answer. It doesn't mean you have to, and don't let it spoil the way that you write, but this is a good and quick way of making sure that you include both knowledge and also your explanation within the same paragraphs. So let's see one example. Firstly, my point. One important change in ranching that affected the cowboy's way of life was an end to the open range. Following the Great Die-Up after the harsh winter of 1886 to 87, small ranches tended to survive better than larger ones. This had an important effect on how cowboys lived and worked. As a result, cowboys spent more time on the ranch itself, living in bunkhouses. Unlike the unruly lifestyle of the cowboys at the end of the long drive, cowboys employed by ranches tended to live in a bunkhouse perhaps only for a season. This was important for the cowboy's way of life because bunkhouse life was far more regulated by rules and order than had been the case before. So let's consider where I'm picking up some marks here. Firstly, I get some marks for A1 and AO2 for knowing about the end of the open range and for clearly relating that to a change in ranching and a change in the cowboy's way of life. I support that with some accurate AO1 knowledge about the Great Die-Up and how ranches changed, which is supported by further knowledge about bunkhouses, the cowboy's lifestyle and why it changed. And then I make that comparison. This is a change in the cowboy's way of life because the bunkhouse life is more regulated than what had come before. So is that about the importance of changes in ranching to the cowboy's way of life? Yes, I've said about the change. Smaller ranches thriving better after the Great Die-Up. And I've also given the effect it had on the cowboy's way of life. More regulated, bunkhouse-based living. Let's have another go. After all, you'll need to include more examples than I've shown so far. Let's see what you think of this. One way that ranches changed was when John Iliff established his ranch in Colorado. Iliff noticed that by having the cattle fed on grass nearer to the cow towns and railroads, they arrived in better condition and could be sold at a higher price. He became the first millionaire in Denver. This changed the cowboy's way of life as they were needed to drive the cattle to the railhead towns. This shows how important ranching was, because after Iliff was successful, many other people took up ranching leading to a beef bonanza in the 1870s. So what do you think? That's all accurate, isn't it? But let's consider if it actually addresses the question. So I've got one change to ranching in the fact that John Iliff actually establishes it, and I might get some AO1 marks of that. After all, this particular question isn't specifying a date range, so I might get away with it. However, the next bit, although it's accurate, is completely irrelevant, so I wouldn't get any extra marks there. That's not really about changes in ranching, and it's definitely not about changes to the cowboy's way of life. I attempt, though, to link it back to the cowboy's way of life here, but am I truly successful? Well, possibly, but I doubt it somehow. It depends on how generous the examiner was feeling at this time, but I would be inclined to say that they probably wouldn't give you any AO2 marks there because it's not really related to the importance of changes in ranching. And the last bit is definitely not linked to the importance of changes in ranching. It might be phrased as if it is, but if we look at it, it's really about how Iliff influenced the beef bonanza that came later, and that's not about the cowboy's way of life at all. No marks for that, I'm afraid. However, I've given you an example of how not to do it, and beforehand I gave you an example of how you should do it. 2 paragraphs like the first example and you'd probably get on just fine with this, and give a short conclusion showing the importance at the end. Now let's try some of these. Explain the importance of the buffalo to the survival of the Plains Indians. Explain the importance of the railroads to the settlement of the West. Explain the importance of the gold rush in 1849 to law and order in the West. Explain the importance of the Homestead Act 1862 to the settlement of the West. And explain the importance of the Oregon Trail on migration to the West. Notice that unlike some of the longer answers, like the 12-mark and 60-mark answers in the other papers, you don't get any stimulus points with this. You're just expected to know what it's all about. Another thing to notice is they all follow a very similar format. It's the importance of one thing to another related thing. So you've got to make sure that you're explaining the importance in relation to both of those different items within the question. I sometimes find it handy to circle elements of the question or maybe highlight them to really make sure that I've got that. If you're one of my students, you'll want to stop it here because we are doing the American West, but if you're not, I've got some other examples from other topics that you might want to try. If you're studying Spain and the New World, you could try these. Choose any two of those, or do all three if you're just doing it for practice. The importance of the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 for Spanish exploration. The importance of Balboa's claim of authority over the Pacific in 1513 for the Spanish Empire, and the importance of the capture of Atahualpa, oh my goodness me, I do struggle with these Native American names, in 1533 for the Spanish defeat of the Incas. And British America. Any of these three. The importance of the Paxton Boys, 1763 to 64 for the government in Pennsylvania. The importance of the Boston Tea Party for relations with Britain, 1773 to 74. That seems like quite a kind question to me. And the importance of the Battle of Saratoga, 1777 for the American victory in the War of Independence. And if you're doing superpower relations, the importance of the events in Hungary in 1956 for the development of the Cold War. The importance of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 for relations between the US and Soviet Union. And the importance of Gorbachev's new thinking for Soviet control in Eastern Europe. Some final points then. 8 mark explain the importance of X to Y questions require similar AO1 and AO2 skills to the 12 mark questions in the first part of the paper, or indeed in some of the other Edexcel papers. You will need specific knowledge of both issues mentioned in the question. You'll need to explain the importance, not just describe examples of what you know. Remember to link your explanations back to the question. How is one thing important to the other issue mentioned in the question? Remember also that you'll need to answer 2 of the 3 questions that you're given, choosing the ones that you feel most confident about. So don't just stop at 1, answer 2. And don't try and answer 3. That'll be a waste of your time and everyone else's. That's the end of this rapid revision exam skills lesson. I hope it's been useful to you, and if it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you need any further advice, you could always put a question in the comments below, and if I can respond and help, I'll certainly do so. If you're preparing for an exam, the very best of luck going forward. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.